I typically fly a lot. I take about 100 segments a year. And last year I found myself flying out of RDU, which is our local airport. And it was the shortest flight of my life. We had just gotten up. We were about 4 minutes into the flight. We had already kind of made the turn to go into the direction that we were heading. And all of a sudden, I could see the plane literally do a 180. And I looked at the person sitting next to me, and I said, that's typically not a good idea. And I looked out the window, and there, sitting below me, was the place we had just left literally minutes ago. Not too long after that, when my knuckles started getting white, the pilot came on, and he said, "Don't panic." He said, "But we've lost all of the guidance systems in the entire plane. We have to go back to the airport at RDU." And so good news, they made another bank. They got back to the airport. We landed. And I was heading to a speaking engagement. So now I'm starting to get worried about, this plane's not going to get me there. How am I going to get to the city I need to go to? So right when we land, of course, I take out my mobile phone. I fire up my phone, and right there's from the airline I fly, there's an email that says, "Hey, we know that there's an issue with your flight. Here are the different ways that you can rebook." One of them, they said, go to your app. So I fire up the app. There's a little notice there that says, "Hey, we know that you just had this inconvenience. Here are 1 or 2 potential flight options for you. In fact, you can just rebook by pressing a button." I thought that was pretty good. I rebooked very quickly. It was a relief that I wasn't going to have to immediately stand in line somewhere. And then I realized, am I going to be able to make that connection? I ended up calling the call center for the airline. And immediately when they picked up the phone for me, they said, "Hello, Mr. Phelps. We know that you're at Raleigh right now. We know there's an interruption with your flight. We can see that you've rebooked." And then I talked through them with different options of maybe getting on a quicker flight to get to the city I needed to go to. And then, of course, as I was on the runway, I had kind of tweeted about the experience that I had, kind of this 8-minute flight, the shortest flight in my life. And within 5 minutes, someone from the airline had replied to my tweet. And I thought to myself, this is an airline I fly all the time, but literally they had nailed it in every different channel, and they created a seamless experience for me. I'm a huge fan of this airline. In fact, I sing their praises every chance I get. And the reason why I reacted so strongly in that experience that could have been a horrible experience is how they were able to create that experience for me. And the reason why I reacted so strongly happens to do with how our brains have evolved. So my wife calls this my Homer sapien brain. See, how we've evolved as humans is 80% of how we view other people, and over 50% of how we view brands comes down to just 2 things. And it's based on how we've evolved as humans. Because when we walked out of the cave, everything we came into contact with, we had to ask 2 questions. First was this: what is the intent of this thing or person that I'm coming into contact with? And 2, what is their ability to carry out that intent? And if you can break those 2 things down, what is the intent? That breaks down to a thing we call warmth, and then their ability to carry it out is competence. And we're judging not only people, but the brands that we deal with the same way. So if you think about it, you can actually chart this out. You can be seen as high warmth or low warmth, high competence or low competence. And let's think about it from an omni-channel point of view, right? There's warmth and there's competence. What if you're a brand that was low and low? So meaning that whoever you interacted with wasn't warm, and then the systems that you had to interact with weren't connected. It wasn't the ability to pick up from one channel to another. How would you feel about being in this experience with a brand? Not good, right? In fact, you might even get angry. You might have a sense of disgust. Now let's think about a brand that might be high warmth but low competence. So the people that you interact with, hey, they mean well, but the systems that they have and the technology they employ don't work. What do you feel about these brands that you interact with? Almost a sense of pity or sad, like they're trying to do a good job, but they're just not set up to succeed. Lower right, how about if you have high competence, but you're low warmth? So great systems, but the people that you interact with aren't that great. You almost have a sense of, envy. You like the overall experience, you just don't like how you're being treated. You would hope they would do better. This top right, though, high warmth and high competence, is where I think brands can make a difference. If they've got the people and they've got the systems to be able to create that great experience, how do you feel when you deal with brands that are both high warmth and high competence? You feel good about it. You take a sense of pride, and more importantly, they're the folks that you actually tell other people to do business with. This is where I put the airline that I fly on a frequent basis. If you want to go deeper into this is a great book by Chris Malone and Susan T. Fisk. It's called The Human Brand. But that leads us to the first lesson that we're going to talk about today. The idea of 80% of how we're judged comes down to just two things: warmth and competence. First of 9 lessons, real quickly, why did I pick 9? I could have went with a top 10 list. I'm a fan of Spinal Tap. I could have even taken it one louder to 11. Why 9? Well, 9 happens to relate to the distance between the stem of our brain and the top of our heart. It's exactly 9 inches. And where I believe the great brands lie is that they have the ability to make this journey from the head to the heart. Now, if you can humor me for a second, I want everyone to raise their right hand like this. So it turns out everyone in this room has a built-in ruler right now. The distance between your thumb and your pinky for nearly 6 out of 7 people in this room, within 1/8 of an inch, is exactly 9 inches. So try that out with your neighbor if you want to see if it actually works. So here's the context of what I would like you to think about today. As we review the next 8, is 1, I would love for you to think about how could you apply some of these principles to the companies that you work for. But I also realize that everyone in this room is a leader and a manager of people. My hope is that you can also, as we talk about these things, take a look in the mirror and think about how do you apply these things to yourself. So customer experience, why is it key? We all know it's important. But here's some research for Gartner. they came out with a stat. They said 89% of companies designate that customer experience is the number one thing that they're going to compete on. It's the main thing that they're going to compete on. And what's amazing to me is you only have to go back 5 years ago when they did this same survey at Gartner, and the number was 36%. Here's another stat from Gartner. Gartner talked about how important retention is going forward, keeping the customers that you have. And they said if you could just reduce your churn by 5 percentage points. So if you were retaining 75% of your customers year over year, if you could take that up to 80%, the impact to your business is massive, between 25% to 125% to your bottom line profit. Why? Why does keeping more of your customers around, why is that so important? What do happy customers that stick around tend to do? Refer. They tell other people. Your cost of acquisition start to go down, and your customers tend to stay with you longer. But here's one of the things I think in business that's often lost, is that we look at customers as equals. So a customer that we get through traditional advertising or other means, are they equal to a customer that is referred to our business? What do you guys think? Are they equal? No. In fact, that referred customer to you could be upwards of 4 times as valuable over their lifetime. Now, why 4 times? If a customer's been referred to you, over their lifetime they will spend up to twice the amount of money with you, meaning that they come back more often, they stay longer as customers if they've been referred. But here's the magic. If they've been referred themselves, what do you think they're more apt to do? To refer others. In fact, they will refer up to twice the amount of people. Customer experience powered by omnichannel is the new competitive advantage. Now, I have a little bit of a confession to make. My first 20 years in business was in marketing. And everything I did in my career was all about chasing the prospective customer as opposed to taking care of the customers that we already had. So real briefly, I started my career on the agency side in sports. I worked with a group called IMG. I then went over to the brand side. I worked for Adidas and the New York Yankees for about 10 years. I had actually a George Costanza moment. Every day I used to go to work in Yankee Stadium. I never slept under my desk, but it was an interesting experience. Then I went into golf for a couple of years, and then I went full circle. I went back to the agency side with a group called Synergy. Everything I did was about eyeballs and earlobes. It was how can we make the logo bigger? How can we drive impressions? In fact, I did things, especially in my last agency, that were so big, they were solely designed to be on the front page of a newspaper or to be the lead story on the 11 o'clock news. Let me give you a sense of some of the things I did. For KFC, I created the world's largest logo. This was done near Area 51. It was called Face from Space. And I knew you could actually see it from space, and we knew that because we shot it with the Google satellite. This programmed 650 million media impressions. It went viral. I've done things like create a 60-foot tall M&M and floated it right into New York Harbor. right in front of Lady Liberty herself. This was to launch a website where you could create your own avatar of yourself for M&Ms. I'm a fan of coffee. I used to live in the Pacific Northwest. This was a fun one. For one day, I rebuilt the original Starbucks in Bryant Park in New York City. This is Howard Schultz. He said it was the loudest and the largest marketing event that Starbucks had ever done. Then I started even doing more crazy stuff. This was for Walmart. Put a 40-foot Viking ship into Times Square. This was to launch all of the merchandise for the movie How to Train Your Dragon. When I did this one, I thought to myself, these are effective, but they're not scalable, they're not sustainable. It wasn't until I did this next one that I thought maybe I kind of jumped the shark. I gave away a Mediterranean island for I Can't Believe It's Not Butter with this guy, Fabio. And I thought to myself, this is going back 10 years ago, I'm part of the problem, but I didn't know what the solution was. And I was living outside of New York City at the time, and I had in New York City what I call a moment of truth. Here I am at one of these nice rooftop bars in New York City. I'm with a work colleague. We're about to go to a networking event. And I'm enjoying, as you only can in New York City, a $14 beer. I don't even know how you can enjoy a $14 beer. And all of a sudden, I look across from us, and there's this older gentleman sitting on his own. And every once in a while, I can see him kind of scan the room. And it's obviously he's waiting for someone to arrive. And he's been on his own for over a half an hour. And so I start feeling bad for him, so I lean in just to start conversation. And I go, excuse me, do you know we spend 10% of our life waiting? Would you guys agree with that? Some people think it's more. Now, I know it's true because I once read it online. Right, so it has to be true. And he looked at me and he laughed. He said, he says, I am waiting for someone. And I said, well, obviously they're not on time. And I'll never forget this. He shot me the strangest look. And he said, on time? He says, no one is ever on time. So wait a second, I've been on time before, not often. And I'll never forget this. This guy raised his finger to me, and he gave me the Dikembe finger wave. And he said, no. He says, no one is ever on time. He says, in fact, on time is a myth. So what do you mean it's a myth? He says, no one in life is ever on time. He said, in fact, people in life are either early or they're late. No one is ever on time. And right then it hit me. That same reasoning applies to the customers that we serve every day. It's not about chasing the prospect, it's about taking care of the customer. Does anyone here in this room ever just meet the expectations of a customer? Do you meet the expectations of your customers? You're saying yes. I would argue you don't. You either exceed them or you fall short. In fact, if you're only setting out just to meet expectations, it's going to be tough. So here was the takeaway. There's no such thing as meeting expectations. In fact, expectations continue to go up and go up and go up over time. This is a study by IBM. They talk about how essentially customers now, their expectations are greater than they've ever been. Here's what they found. They said more than 3 out of 4 customers that you deal with, they not only expect you to know them as an individual, but they expect you to understand what their needs are. Here's the second thing they found. 4 out of 5 customers, 81%, they expect faster and faster response times. with the brands that they now deal with. And lastly, 2 out of 3, and this speaks directly to omnichannel, they expect that the brands that they work with are going to harmonize the experience that they have. Meaning if they're interacting in one channel, they expect if they go into another, they're not going to miss a beat. That company is going to know from that previous interaction and be able to continue that experience. Lesson number 3, the biggest myth in business is the idea of just meeting expectations. I went home from that night in New York City, and I decided I was going to go on a quest. I was going to start to seek out companies that found a way to do a little bit more in the experience that they provided for their customers. And so I started this crowdsourcing project. It was called the Purple Goldfish Project. And I set out to find 1,001 examples. Now, why purple and why a goldfish? Let me start with the goldfish bit first. So the goldfish was actually inspired by a company that's based in San Francisco called Kimpton. Has anyone here stayed at a Kimpton before? Okay, a few people. Do they get the idea of a customer experience? Absolutely. Do they do the little things to exceed your expectations? So if you haven't stayed at a Kimpton, there's always gourmet coffee for free in the lobby. They're super pet friendly. You can bring your pet. In the afternoon, they do wine tasting. But here's my favorite. If you stay at a Kimpton, at some of the Kimptons, maybe you're there on business, you're getting a little bit lonely, these guys will give you a pet goldfish for your stay. It's a program that they call Guppy Love. They encourage you to name the goldfish. Is it possible in today's age, if you had a goldfish in your room, is it possible that you're not sharing that on Facebook or posting it on Instagram or telling people when you got back? And I love it as a little signature thing that they do. But the goldfish is near and dear to my heart. Anybody with me? My first pet was a goldfish. Anyone first pet as a goldfish? Yes? I thought I saw somebody raise their hand. So I can remember 6 years old. I'm at like the carnival or state fair. You threw the ping pong balls as well, right? And I walked home so proud with my plastic bag of goldfish. And I only thought that goldfish ever got so big. And it turns out the average goldfish grows, they grow their entire life. The average gets to be 3 inches. Does anybody want to fathom a guess of what the world's largest goldfish is? Not a carp, but an average ordinary goldfish. 12 inches, bigger. Nearly 20 inches. Think about that. That would be like walking out of this building and bumping into somebody who's 3 stories tall. How is that even possible? That really intrigued me. How is that possible that you can have average and you can have kind of the monster cousin? Well, think about it. In business, there are average size businesses and there are ones that grow to be much bigger. And it turns out when I pulled back the layers on this, that there's 5 ways that this goldfish will grow. And these same 5 ways apply to everyone here in this room. So we're going to have fun with this. I'm going to give away some books. We're going to make this interactive. So here's the deal. There's 5 things, and I've got some books here. We've all heard this, right, about a goldfish. The size of the bowl that goldfish is in will determine how big it can get, right? You've heard that. The bigger the bowl, the bigger the pond, the more that goldfish can grow. So raise your hand if you think you know what that equates to in business. What do you think the size of the bowl or the pond is if you're in business? Size of your market. Winner, chicken or goldfish dinner. Can you hand that over to him? Awesome. Yeah, so it's the market. The bigger the market, the more that you can grow. I mean, that's a no-brainer. Here's the second one, and there's no book for this because this is too easy. The growth of that goldfish will also be determined by the amount of other goldfish that are in the bowl or the pond. Right? So the more goldfish that are in the bowl or the pond, the tougher it's going to be for that goldfish to grow. So if you think about it, this is the no-brainer, right? Who are the other goldfish? Your competition. All right, it's going to get tougher from here on out. Here's the third thing, the quality of the water that goldfish is in. So think about the surrounding environment for that goldfish, the amount of nutrients that are in the water, how clear the water is. The more nutrients, the clearer the water, the more that goldfish will grow. How about in business? Organization, culture. I want to go macro. I thought I heard, who said economy? All right, you both get one. There you go. There you go. The economy. So think about it. The nutrients could be the ability to get capital to grow your business. That cloudiness could be things like consumer confidence, people's willingness to purchase. Here's the fourth thing, how that goldfish does in its first 120 days of life. So how it gets out of the gate will be a determining factor of ultimately how big it can get. So if you're in business, what would you call the first 120 days? Who said startup? Yes. Okay, can you? Awesome. Yeah, so startup. Or if you have a new product or service, right? How that does in the first 4 months will ultimately determine how big it can get. So here's the fifth thing. So far we've had the size of the bowl, the amount of other goldfish. We've had the quality of the water in the first 120 days. Here's the fifth thing, genetic makeup. So how the genes that goldfish has when it's born will ultimately determine how big it can get. So the better the genes, the more it's separated from all the other goldfish, the more it's going to be able to grow. The poorer the genes, the more alike it is, it's going to grow less. So let me grab another one. So if you're in business, what do you think genetic makeup is? Culture, okay? And I would agree that culture is a big part of it, but think more about the product and the services that you have. Convenience, process. I'm looking for the D word. Who said differentiation? You didn't win one already, did you? All right, great. Your neighbor did. There you go. Shannon got one. Differentiation. Now, what I challenge people is to think about it. Everyone in this room has been in business for more than 4 months, right? So let's take that out of the equation. Which of the other 4 do you have any control over? Which of the other 4, right? Do you have control over the market? No. Control over your competition? Not unless you're acquiring them, right? Anyone here have control over the economy? Please see me afterwards. Be great. The only thing you have control over is that fifth thing, is genetic makeup. And I would argue that as much as you'd like to differentiate your product or service, that's becoming harder and harder to do. But what you can do is figure out how you deliver that experience. How you stand out in what I would call a sea of sameness. All right, so that's why a goldfish. Now, why purple? Well, purple's kind of the color of differentiation, but the kind of inspiration came from this iconic American city. What am I talking about? New Orleans, and its most famous event, which is Mardi Gras. Purple happens to be one of 3 official colors of Mardi Gras: purple, green, and gold. And the reason why it's an ode to New Orleans is that there's one word that comes from New Orleans that exemplifies this concept of doing a little something extra to raise that experience up. One word that Mark Twain once said was worth traveling all the way to New Orleans to get. That one word is called lagniappe. Who here has been, anyone from the New Orleans area? Southeast? Who knows lagniappe? What's lagniappe? A little something extra. So if you're down in New Orleans, it's literally the idea of, it's a Creole word, so it means literally the additional gift or to give more. And if you're down in New Orleans, it's customary for a business to go beyond just the transaction, to do a little something extra to honor the relationship. So if you order a dozen beignets, they give you the 13th. If you buy a few drinks at a bar on Bourbon Street, they might buy back a round for you. So I mentioned I started this project. I don't know what I was thinking about when I decided 1,001 would be a good number. Has anyone here collected 1,001 of anything? No? Let me give you advice if you ever think about collecting 1,001 of anything. Don't. I should have taken advice that someone once gave me about, and I'm going to go back to that in a second. Nope. I should have taken advice that someone once gave me about cross-country skiing. Has anyone done cross-country skiing? Is it hard or easy? Very hard. So this is the advice that someone once gave me, that if I ever decided to take up cross-country skiing, he told me, he said, start with a small country. I don't know what I was thinking. I could have done 501 and it would have been impressive. I'm not sure what I was thinking of. This is the acronym I use because lagniappe is tough to say. It's even more difficult to spell. Is this idea of glue. Something that you do that's sticky by giving little unexpected extras. I'll share maybe my favorite example of 1,001. Comes from St. Paul, Minnesota. A place called Izzy's Ice Cream. And I love it because it's simplicity. You go to Izzy's and you order a scoop of ice cream. They let you pick another flavor, and they give you a mini scoop for free on top. That little scoop is called the Izzy. And I love it as something little that they do to value that relationship. So I mentioned I started out in 2009. I started collecting examples. I thought it was going to be easy. It wasn't. It took me nearly a little over 2 years to collect over 1,000 examples. But what came clear to me was this, that there was 12 different ways that you could do this. And those 12 different ways could be broken down into two concepts, one which was value and the other which is maintenance. So here are the ones on the value side, and here are the 6 on the maintenance. So if you think about the value or the things that you give, the maintenance is more about what it's like to do business with you. So it turns out you can matrix this out as well. And ideally, you want to be seen by your customers as somebody who provides high value, but is low maintenance. A friend of mine said that this was his dating theory when he was in college, right? He wanted somebody who was high value but low. Now, if you're looking at me and you don't know what maintenance is, that means you're high maintenance, for sure. But this is a serious question. What do you think is more important in business? Is it more important to be seen as, is value more important than maintenance? Raise your hands if you think value is more important. All right, raise your hand if you think maintenance. Does anyone have arms? That was... I would argue that this maintenance side of the equation is way more important, because the true test of loyalty is when somebody has an issue that needs to get solved and they need to reach out to the brand that they work with. In fact, this is a friend of mine, Mike Wittenstein, has this definition of customer experience, and I love it. It's an equation. He says the customer experience is this: it's everything that your brand does for the customers that you serve. So that's firmly about all of the value. He said, but then you have to minus this. You have to minus all of the things that your business processes do to the customers that you serve. And that's all about this idea of maintenance. What is it like when I deal with you if I have an issue? And ultimately, if you net this out, it's how that experience makes your customer feel. So I want to real quickly, I'm going to go through the 6 examples, and then we're going to do a fun exercise at each of the tables to talk about some of the best practices that you do. Here's the first one: follow up. This is a simple thing from a maintenance thing. This is a guy named Ed Mitchell. He is the founder of Mitchell's. It's a clothing store in Connecticut. Ed Mitchell, every day, writes 5 handwritten notes to his customers, following up with them and thanking them for their business. He wrote a book called Hug Your Customers, great book. That turns out, if you think that's not a lot, 5 a day, that turns out to a little less than 2,000 each year that he sends out to his customers, thanking them for their business. Added service is another thing that you can do from a maintenance perspective. So this is a simple one from Safelite. Has anyone ever had to have their windshield repaired from Safelite? You have, okay. So they send you a note, and they actually send you the picture of the person that's going to come out and repair it. And they'll come to your home or your office. And what they do is they have this, I still can't wrap my head around this, they have this funky machine that they attach to your windshield. And what they do is they actually drill a hole into your windshield, and then they put an epoxy resin into the crack. Now, it takes 10 minutes for the epoxy to actually cure and harden. So what do? They typically go back to their van, they grab glass cleaner, they grab a vacuum, and for the remainder of that 10 minutes, they do the entire interior of your car. Did that happen to any of you over here? So you come out, not only does your windshield look like it's brand new, but your car looks like it just rolled off the showroom floor. Totally unexpected, totally talkable. Here's another one. I love this example for leveraging technology. So this is a Canadian telecom company. People call all the times because they have issues. And what they found is that when they've studied it, people that have issue A very frequently might have issue C. And what they've done is they've figured out with these clusters that if they've got somebody who calls with issue A, before they hang up the call at the call center, they spend a couple of minutes to already talk about issue C, hopefully saving a call back. So I love that as an added service from Omnichannel. Convenience is another one. How do you make it easy for your customers to do business? TD Bank, Toronto Dominion, they're all about convenience. Many of their branches are open 7 days a week. Every night, a few nights a week, they'll be open to 8 o'clock at night. Why is convenience important? Why is it important to give people multiple channels? That directly impacts loyalty. So this is the CX Lab from Teleperformance. I love this. If people have never done they haven't touched any of your channels, their likelihood to recommend you is 21%. If they've used 4 of the different channels, that goes up to 40% likelihood to recommend. And if somebody has interacted with you in 8 or more channels, that jumps up to 57%. Being convenient across channels drives loyalty. Waiting, that's another thing from a maintenance perspective. If you're successful, waiting becomes inevitable as part of the experience. And Lexus understands this. And if you get your car serviced at Lexus, their service centers are literally like an airport executive lounge. Super comfortable. You actually enjoy having to wait. 5th type is special needs. So people that you deal with, they're going to have potentially special needs. I love this. This is Rainforest Cafe. They were one of the first companies to really understand how important it is if they have customers with food allergies. So they maintain a separate menu. Many times the chef will actually come out and talk to the customer to make sure that they're okay with preparation. Last type is handling mistakes. What happens when you have an issue? This is a fun example. This is a Canadian company called Nurse Next Door. They send home healthcare workers into people's homes. When these guys make a mistake, they write a handwritten note of apology, but they also send a freshly baked apple pie as part of the apology. Literally a humble pie. And each year they spend about $2,000 on these pies. They know it saves them over $100,000 in potential lost business. Here's the deal in omnichannel: how you handle an issue or a mistake matters. Another thing from CX Lab, they found that if somebody has a positive experience, their loyalty increases by 14%. What happens if they have a negative experience? It's going to go down. In fact, it's a 40-point difference between positive and negative. So here's what I want to do. This is the 4th lesson. Little things can make the biggest difference. Here's what I want to do. At each of the tables, and if you only have a couple people at your table, feel free to jump to another table. But this is what we're going to do. I'm going to give you 7 minutes. And what I want you to do is think about some of these things that you might do at your business. I want you to share 5 best practices. So I'll need one person at the table who will be the scribe. And then right at the end of the 7 minutes, I want you to narrow it down to 2 top ones out of those 5. And then I want you as a table to pick one that you would be willing to share back to the entire group. So you've got 7 minutes. Go. Okay, so we've all picked a winner. Who wants to share their best practice with the entire group? And here's the deal. I've got 2 books left, so we're going to have 2 people that will share. Yes, right over there.
Could you please stand up when you share? Yeah. Thank you. We appreciate it.
What's your name?
Hi, I'm Jesse from Redbubble.
Can we say hello to Jesse? We can do better than that. Can we say hello to Jesse?
Hi, guys.
There you go. Jesse, what's the best practice for...
All right, so clearly I'm prepared to do anything for a book. The best practice we talked about was one around convenience. So with my company, we're an e-commerce marketplace. The essential model is that artists join the site, they upload their work, they sell it through us. So as a result, we've got a huge platform with over 17 million designs. So what that means for us when we handle our returns process is that it's extremely difficult to kind of monetize that process on the back end.
Right.
The content that people give us is just so miscellaneous and so specific. So what we build into our returns and exchange process is that we don't require any physical returns when we're handling that process.
Excellent. So you make it super easy for them to be able to get what they need without eliminating some hoops.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a real surprise on the flip side. So we kind of just drop it in at the end, and we see people get really excited about that because they're used to kind of that hassle and the inconvenience of having to physically return, and we just tell them to donate it to a charity or a friend.
That's great. Thank you, Jesse. That's awesome. That's cool. We got one right here.
Hi, Brent from Hawaiian Airlines.
Can we say hello to Brent?
Aloha. So one of the things that we do is, and you've probably been on a flight where, pilot says, is there anybody who has medical professional experience on board the aircraft? There's an emergency. And, you see the nurses, the doctors come up and help out guests. So we have that too. A while back, we get, one of the areas of my responsibility is our consumer affairs office. So we get feedback from these doctors, medical professionals, and they'd say, I took the time out of my flight, it was robbed me of my relaxation, my time alone to help you out, and you folks didn't say thank you. Maybe the flight attendants did, maybe they didn't, but we'd see these complaints. So selfishly, trying to get rid of the complaints, we came up with a program to basically thank these guests for their service. So we worked with a company called Big Island Candies out of Hilo, Hawaii, and they make these great shortbread cookies that are dipped in chocolate. And so we will actually send any guest who helps out their guest and their fellow passengers in need a box of Big Island candies with a hand-signed card from Mark Dunkler, President and CEO. It's actually not really hand-signed. It looks like it's hand-signed, but it's printed really well, and you can't actually tell. Most guests come back and say, I can't believe the President and CEO took the time to write this nice card. And we say, yeah, sure. But it's just something that I think we try to surprise these folks. And now instead of these complaints that come back, we get these thank yous that say, thanks, I wasn't expecting that.
That's a great little extra. Thank you. So we're going to motor through the last 5 lessons here, but here's the thing. Bain, I love this. They did this survey and they talked to companies and they said, how many of you right now are providing a great, even a superior, outstanding experience? And 4 out of 5 top executives said, yep, check the box, we're already doing it. Who do you think Bain asked next? The customers. Do you think the customers agreed? No, 8%. I love this when you ride the tube in London, the voice comes on and it says, mind the gap. 72 percentage points here. And I love this. Bain went deeper and they said, why do these companies think they're doing this and the customers think they're doing X? And it turns out there's 3 reasons. Here's the first one. For 8%, it was simply a failure to design. Meaning they weren't setting out to provide a great experience, but that was by far the smallest number. Here was the next. 25% was a failure to execute. So they might have had a great idea of what that experience was, but they didn't have the people, the process, or the resources to pull it off. But here was the overwhelming takeaway. 39%, it was a failure to develop a capability to continuously renew that experience. Because does the expectations of your customers, do they stay flat? No, they continue to raise every year. And you need to continuously develop that. So the kind of model that I use and a lot of people use is a simplified kind of design thinking model. The first D of this 3D is discover. So how do you understand what you want to be? How are you essentially going to make sure you're getting there? Once you know where you want to go, then you can jump into the second D, which is design. Design helps bring that to life. You then test, you pilot, you verify. Only then are you ready for the last D, which is then deploying that. So figuring out how you actually can bring that experience to life. And then once you do that, immediately going back to discovery. So what I want to do with the rest of the time, I want to talk about kind of the 5 keys to omnichannel in this lens of this 3D development process. So what's the first key? The first key is simple. You need to know where you want to go. You have to have a strategy. And so where do you start with that? You start to discover and you start to understand what the preferences are for your customers that you serve in each and every one of the channels that you have. And so the first thing that you do is you survey the customers that you have, ask them how they want to interact with you. You then look to your team members and say, what do you think we should be doing? And then finally, you trust but you verify. You look at the data and you start to understand where things are moving in terms of the channels that you offer. And once you have that strategy, you're ready for kind of the second thing. So definitely the first key is you have to have a strong strategy. You have to know where you want to go. Here's the second thing. Once you have that strategy, though, you then have to understand how you're going to be doing. You have to identify the metrics that you're going to be using. This is Peter Drucker, probably the most famous quote on measurement. What does Peter Drucker say about measurement? What gets measured gets what? You can't manage it. In fact, he usually is misquoted. He said, what gets measured gets improved. And the key is that it's not a one-size-fits-all, right? Every channel that you work with is going to have different metrics based on that channel. For some, it might be customer effort. For some, it might be net promoter. It could be first call resolution. It could be average response time. But you want to make sure that each and every one of the channels have their own metric. So here's the idea. You have to understand that your customers are going to have different tolerances. They're going to have different preferences and expectation based on each and every channel that they deal with you in. So if that's the first 2 Ds of discover, you're then ready to jump into the second D, and that's design. And the key to design is this. You need to be able to select a technology partner. You have to have a platform that's going to support you across all of your channels. And everyone here in this room, obviously, Teleperformance is satisfying that for you. But when you have that channel, that technology, you have to make sure that it's satisfying what you need. And so here are the 4 things that you need to ask. 1, can it support you across all of the channels that you want to offer? 2, is it going to preserve the information so you'll have access to that information when people go from one channel to the next? Is it going to allow somebody to start in one channel and then be able to hop to another seamlessly? And then lastly, and this may be the most important, it needs to be secure. This is research by CX Lab. They said 72% of brands say they would consider leaving a preferred vendor if fraud was involved and there were issues in terms of the data being compromised. The takeaway here is that when it comes to picking a technology provider, out of these 4 things, security is job number 1. So you've picked your technology provider. Here's the 4th thing, and I think this is so key. You have to consider well-designed staffing profiles. You have to put the right people in the right places. And here is the one takeaway. What do you think is better? Do you want to be a great recruiter and an okay manager versus being an okay recruiter and a great manager? What do you think is more important? I'd argue that every day of the week and twice on Sunday, you would want to be awesome at recruiting and just okay at managing. It's going to make your job a lot easier. So what do you need to do? You need to have a checklist of things that you're going to look for. You want to make sure that you get high-quality people. They're motivated. They're empathetic, meaning they have a high degree of caring. I think that goes without saying. One of my favorite examples, this is an airline example. They would group hire. They no longer do this, but this is a fun thing. They would have everyone come to the front of the room and tell the most embarrassing story of their life. Can you imagine that? And what the trick was, they were not even paying attention to the person at the front of the room. They were looking at the faces of the other 20 or 30 people in the room to be able to measure the amount of empathy that they had. Empathy is key. You need to keep folks motivated. And I actually have motivated here twice for purpose. You need to recognize them and understand that recognition can actually fuel performance. A couple fun examples, Camelback, they have what they call the Water Carrier Award, which they do a lot in a lot of their channels. These are people that are kind of carrying the water. Container Store, one of their core things is flexibility. So the award that they have for their support staff is called the Gumby Award. They want to promote that idea of being flexible. Collaborative, here's the takeaway. Each channel requires kind of its own skills and capabilities, and you need to put the right people in the right places. Here's we're getting past design, now we're ready to deploy. Here's the fifth thing, you need to map the workflow. Currently what you're doing, and then also start to map kind of future workflows so you can continuously improve that. And the ideal is what you want to be able to guarantee that people are going to interact with you in the same way across all of the channels that they interact. So with that, we have just a few minutes. I want to open it up for questions. We have maybe time for 1 or 2 or 3 questions, and then I'm going to finish with a final story, and I've got a little something extra for you. Story about this gentleman, Walt Disney. Back in 1955 in Anaheim, Walt and the Disney company opened Disneyland. And just 2 years after Disneyland was open, in November of 1957, Walt had an idea. Walt was an idea guy. And this was his idea. For the entire month of December, he wanted to do a parade right down Main Street. He loved parades. Now, this was going to cost Disney, back in 1957, $350,000 to do it for the entire month. Now, that's about $5 million today, so it wasn't inconsequential, and Disneyland wasn't this overnight success. So when his accountants heard this idea, they flipped out. In fact, they found Walt and they sat Walt down and they pleaded with him. They said, Walt, don't do the parade. They said, these people in December, they're already going to be in the park. They're not going to miss the parade because they're not even expecting it. And Walt looked up at his accountants and he said, you know what? That's exactly why we need to do the parade. He said, here at Disneyland, we always need to give our customers more than what they expect. He said, if we don't, and they decide not to come back here, it's going to cost us 10 times the amount of money to get them to come back. Well, they did that parade in 1957. In fact, just earlier this year, they opened up in Shanghai, and they do the parade every day in Shanghai. Walt's, and you think about for Disney, that's one of the signature things that they do that differentiates them from any other park. Walt's mantra was this: always exceed expectations. He was so enamored with this, he had his own word for it. He called it plussing. How could you do just a little bit more and plus up the experience? And so my hope as you leave here today, maybe you're thinking a little differently about the customers that you already serve. Maybe you're even thinking outside the bowl. And I'm hoping that you're going to embrace this last lesson. Because I believe the difference between ordinary and extraordinary is just a little something extra. Thank you.